I know.
But I don't know what it was. I mean, Jordan Love didn't throw any incompletions. I mean, Fields didn't throw them in either. So
true.
Yeah. So every play was basically the clock was moving, but that was crazy. So, but let's retweet that. All righty. But yeah, that's not going to do a lot of positives for anybody.
Yeah.
All right. For those joining live, we're going to be starting here in just a minute or two. Brad Spielberger joining us today. So really good day to have Brad on because lots to talk about.
It's one man's opinion.
I'd love that opinion to actually know what's going to happen. This is, I put out an article with the timeline saying you're going to hear about Eberflus on Monday, and then the Bears will address the media, and then you'll hear about Getsy if he's gone after that, and then Fields will be months later. But if Harbaugh gets in the mix here, this whole thing's going to
speed it up for sure. Yeah.
Get messy. All right. We got 70 people here. So we're going to jump in. All right. Post-game show coming down in 3, 2, 1. Welcome in, Bears fans, to Not Your Average Bears post-game show. Bill Zimmerman with you, and with me today, Brad Spielberger from Pro Football Focus. I'm sure you all follow him already, but at PFF_Brad on the Twitter X machine, as the Bears drop the finale of the 2023 season to the rival Green Bay Packers, 17-9 in a game, Brad, that really did not feel like it should have been within one score. I felt like the Packers controlled this game basically from start to finish. We're going to get into the game here. Obviously, we're going to get into the repercussions from this and kind of talk about what we think may happen because of this game. But Brad, let's kind of try and focus as we can as much on the game as possible. And like I was saying, I just felt like Matt LaFleur, Jordan Love, and the Packers, even the Packers defense controlled this game from start to finish.
Packers averaged 7.2 yards per play, which if I had to map that out to what that typically equates to from a scoreboard standpoint, that is a 30-plus point number. No question about it. Like 7 yards per play and above, you're getting into like high 30s, low 40s in terms of probably the average scoring output of a team that for an entire game averaged that many yards per play. It was an absolutely dominant performance. Yeah, bend don't break is good. I get that. There were some nice plays. Tyreek Stevenson in the end zone with a great pass breakup. Terrell Smith almost with the interception. Like there were, some nice positive plays here and there, but this was not close. This is what we saw when the Bears played Atlanta and played Arizona. It just didn't show up on the scoreboard.
Yeah, it was. And I put out a tweet there right around halftime of a cartoon just running around circles around another guy, because that's what it felt like to me for Matt LaFleur. Like we've been praising Matt Eberflus, and for good reason, for the defensive scheme and dialing up pressure and a lot of things he had been doing well here the last 6 weeks or so, but did not work today. There were players streaking open frequently in this one, wide open in certain cases. It felt a lot like week one a lot of times there with Jordan Love, except Jordan Love's got 16 more games under his belt, felt even a little more composed and a little stronger in the pocket. The Bears pass rush was not there. And it just felt to me like every time Matt Eberflus had a defensive play call, Matt LaFleur had the exact right call most of the time. And this has been just a thing for me throughout the season, is I just never feel like Matt Eberflus gives the Bears an edge on Sundays, and really felt like it today.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, he finally was doing some different things. The first 6 weeks we all were complaining there was no blitzing, there was no games up front, they were sitting back in soft coverage. It was the most vanilla defense in the entire NFL. He comes in as the play caller, and you do see some different changes. TJ Edwards on a lot of, come up the middle, mugging the A-gaps, doing different things, bringing some, nickel blitzes, stuff like that, and a little bit of rotating coverage, some more, single high mixing in as they got more and more faith in Jaquan Brisker, kind of playing down in the box, making splash plays. Like there was some, but yeah, against a good opponent, they have not really had a good defensive outing. Maybe, again, I'm responding here now. I'm angry, but they really haven't. And part of it is the talent disparity for sure. But you're bringing a Montez Sweat, you have some other pieces there. No, I mean, he got kicked in the teeth tonight. It was a massacre. And again, I'm saying this facetiously, but this is a team that's starting one of the last, I think it was the second to last pick in the entire NFL draft at left tackle. I think it was the pick before Brock Purdy was their starting left tackle tonight. Their starting right tackle, Zach Tom, who I do love, is a 3rd or 4th round pick. And then his main receivers were 6th round pick Dontavian Wicks, and I want to say 7th round pick Bo Melton last year. And they carved you alive. Like that's good coaching. It's good scheme. It's good planning for this game. And then some sound execution from a bunch of an offense that's younger than Chicago's. And they torched you.
Yeah, no, they really did. And that's the thing. We've talked about it. And, I think a lot of people didn't want to address it a lot the last few weeks because you had the Detroit game. You had a good football team with a good offense, and the Bears, the second Detroit game, obviously, and the Bears put together a good game plan. They executed it well. They won that game handily. So when the naysayers wanted to be like, well, yeah, it's the Cardinals, it's the Falcons, it's the, it's Josh Dobbs and the Vikings. Like there were reasons to, the Carolina Panthers, there were reasons to say why this Bears team was winning. But because they had the Detroit game, people didn't want to just sit there and say, well, who are they beating? But when you pull back, Brad, and you look at the grand scheme of things here, just defensively, we'll get to Justin Fields in the offense here in a minute, but defensively, where we, propped up Matt Eberflus, the Tez effect with Montez Sweat. I'm not saying it shouldn't count for anything, but twice against the Packers, just the offense absolutely torched them. The Kansas City Chiefs game, it torched them. And I know you get later in the season, but you still have the Chargers game when you have a big-time quarterback like Justin Herbert. Now this one here again with Green Bay. This still, to me, other than the one time against Detroit, this still to me is a defense that is a bum slayer. You put a bad offense here, they are going to rip it to pieces, and it's not going anywhere. But you get a legitimate quarterback or a legitimate play caller, they're just going to have a lot of problems. And I know they only scored 17 points, but the Packers left a lot of points on the field today. Bears were lucky that it was only within 8.
It's still a stride. Let's take a step back. Like this, being a bum slayer is still a level on the ladder, right? And we're talking about a team that started a bunch of rookies and sophomores at all secondary positions beside Eddie Jackson. Probably his last game as a Bear. At least if you just based it on his tackling tonight alone, you probably arrive at that conclusion. But I think that was the case regardless. Yeah, I shouldn't be on a podcast right now. I'm going to say some things I regret. So yeah, there were a lot of kind of stepping stone, building block, like good things from young players. Again, like. Being a bum slayer is progress, but yes, against the one game, I'm not going to downplay it. The Lions have a good offense. I'm a huge Ben Johnson fan. They were healthy in that game. Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, all those guys were playing. It was Jared Goff in bad weather, but I don't care. You turn the ball over a million times. You're on this streak of 16 picks in the last 6 games coming into this game. But yeah, it's an above average defense in my opinion, maybe good. It's not a great defense. It's a top 10, top 14 defense right now, which is awesome. And in theory, it gets better as young players develop and grow. But do you pay Jalen Johnson? That's obviously a huge part of it. Didn't play tonight. That was evident. Anyway, yeah, the defense, there's clear signs of growth, and that is encouraging.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely encouraging. A lot of development with a lot of young players this year. There's plenty to build on with this defense. And I think if that was part of the full, if that was the main reason to keep Matt Eberflus, you could make a better argument. But this is just something to me. It's this team. It's spinning its wheels in the mud. And I'll get to Matt Eberflus because I've been down on Matt Eberflus for so much. I had to bite my tongue not being down on him the last few weeks. But it all came bubbling back. I'm kind of with you here, trying to bite my tongue a little bit on some things I want to say. But let's move over to the offensive side of the ball. Actually, before we get to the offensive side of the ball, let's get to the Packers' offensive side of the ball, because I think we would be remiss if we didn't spend a couple minutes talking about Jordan Love. And I think a lot of Bears fans, myself included, were really hopeful that this was going to blow up in their face. And it was like the conversation ahead of this season was, is Jordan Love going to be atrocious where the Packers have a top 5 pick, or is Jordan Love just going to be mediocre and, just the Packers will be stuck in purgatory, NFL purgatory for years to come because they won't know what to do at quarterback. Right now, it doesn't look like either of those are the answer. He's certainly not the first one. The second one, maybe with a year of tape and defenses come back on him next year. But Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love are on the same page. Jordan Love in 2 games against the Bears, I tweeted out the numbers. It's something like 550 yards and 5 touchdowns. It's pain is what it is. It is pain that Jordan Love in his first year, when we had hopes that the Bears had Fields and the Packers were stuck with Love, there was hope as Bears fans. And Brad, it doesn't look good. Right now, it looks like Jordan Love is I don't know if he's going to be a Hall of Famer and a top 5 QB, but he is on the right track to being a good quarterback in the NFL.
I mean, he was nearly flawless tonight. I mean, he had the fumble, yes, which was obviously, solely on him. Boot rollout, or not even a boot, but whatever. Kind of they schemed it so that the defense flowed the other direction, gave him a clear running path. I think that was Tyreek Stevenson makes a nice play, Brisker with the recovery. But yeah, I mean, the throw to Jaden Reed on that last drive was an absolute laser.
Yep.
He had a couple other gorgeous throws, good velocity, good trajectory. I think the big thing for me was when that middle phase of, okay, he's not terrible. He's an NFL starting caliber quarterback, but could he maybe fall in the range of, he's good and shows flashes, but he's not quite good enough. For me, that was the first half of the year on throws 10 plus yards downfield. He was as bad as any quarterback in the NFL. I mean, on traditional statistics, PFF grades, our accuracy charting, which is not a grade thing. It's just like was the pass accurate plus, which means like ball placement away from the defender, all these things. He was bottom 5 in the NFL. Second half of the season, he's a top 5 grade on throws 10 plus yards downfield in the NFL. I mean, and a big thing of that too is not to make excuses. Again, we're not going to judge teams on different spectrums, but every single pass catcher on this team is either a rookie or a second-year player.
Right.
And you start to see okay, maybe Love actually is making some good throws, like it was a Watson drop or a Dobbs drop, or there was a play a couple weeks ago where I think Jaden Reed, who's great, ran the wrong route, and you could tell Love was like, no, based on this coverage, you were supposed to do this. That was all happening. But as all of that gels together, they get a full offseason. Love's not looking over his shoulder, probably signs a contract for $50 million a year this offseason. You have no reason but to expect him to look much better next year, and he already looks pretty good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's had a very good season. 32 touchdown passes on the year. He has had one heck of a season. And actually, the one other thing I want to talk about on the defense before we switch over to the offensive side of the ball is, and you brought up the turnovers and how many turnovers they've had lately. And I remember if we wind the clock back to 2018 and Bears fans were all puffing their chest out about the defense, you saw after that season, you saw a lot of analytical guys, statistical, oriented, that says, look, turnovers are not sustainable. You are not going to be a 30, 35 turnover a year defense, no matter how much you want. It's going to come back to earth. It's going to come back to the mean, regress to the mean. And it did in 2019. I understand Fangio wasn't there, but it did in 2019. The defense was still strong, but it wasn't that same electrifying unit. And I'd say the same thing about Matt Eberflus. When Matt Eberflus's defense was really playing at an elite level, they were turning the ball over constantly. Interception. And that, if you go with the idea that isn't sustainable, you need to look at how the defense plays when it's not turning the ball over constantly and just trying to stop and make stops. And you talk about the bend, don't break defense, which just when you hear bend, don't break defense, but then you see that they're struggling in the red zone, things like that. Well, then you're breaking. So that's the one thing to me, Brad, is that when I want to look at, it's like when you're looking at players, sometimes you want to look at how they look when they're not playing at an elite level and see how they do when they're struggling or they got a tough opponent. And I want to do the same thing with Eberflus's defense. And when things are not going perfectly, it just doesn't feel right.
For sure. And I think the thing, again, to come back to try and stay positive is if they were winning 1-score games against Atlanta and Arizona, then it's a 5-alarm fire, right? Then you're sitting there saying there's zero evidence of any positivity. They were dominating those teams, in Minnesota with Josh Dobbs and whatever. So it is different than, sneaking by against those teams. But yeah, defense is largely dictated by the offense you're playing, and more specifically, the quarterback you're playing, or the play caller scheme, whatever. I mean, even those elite Bears defenses we talk about, that Eagles playoff game, not to bring up the biggest wound that exists, but Nick Foles was just throwing the ball in 2 seconds every time. They were just completely just erasing Khalil Mack and the guys from that game plan, Akeem Hicks, etc. There's always things you can do, and of course, the elite defenses rise to the occasion. They will make plays. They will find a way, but. Here's another example. It's not turnovers, too. It's just sacks. The Eagles set an NFL record last year. They started the year, 8-0. They're still, I know they're absolutely, free-falling right now, but still played with a lead for most of the season. They added Jalen Carter, who obviously has been good, and they had 41 sacks. They're bottom half of the NFL this year. You cannot look at the splash plays and expect that to continue. Honestly, strip those out and then see what things look like, and also control for opponents, stuff like that. That's really the more repeatable, predictable stuff. So, yeah, I still think the defense is going to be a top half of the NFL unit next year. I just think people got over their skis like, oh, it's a top 5 unit. Like, no, it's not. But they'll be above average, and that's fine.
Right. And no, that's what I'm trying to say is that it's fine. It's good. And with a bunch of young players, they can get better. The secondary has a chance to become really sticky and really good moving forward. So I'm not trying to knock the defense. I'm just trying to say what they were doing for the last month or so really wasn't sustainable is the point.
Yeah.
So moving over to the offensive side of the ball, before we get to the quarterback, let's start with Luke Getsy. Let's start with his game plan. And I'll be honest, I had a hard time even understanding what the game plan was. And I'm not saying I'm knocking Luke Getsy because of it, but I felt like there was so much poor execution, especially by the offensive line. I know there were a couple injuries there, but the interior offensive line, Tevin Jenkins was awful on pass protection today. The interior unit there just was getting crushed. And it was, that obviously hurt Justin Fields, but just in overall execution, the offense just did not execute as a group.
Not at all. Not at all. Yeah, the O-line, and particularly the interior, which has been a strength for a lot of the year, was terrible. I mean, obviously, Nate Davis, I don't know if he returned. I know he left. At that point, I was kind of seething and focusing on not on who was playing right guard, but I know he got dinged up. Obviously, he's been bad all year. The thing I think for Getsy, for me, that I've arrived at, and this is a Nagy thing, and I know every time I tweet something even related to the Chiefs in any tangential way, I get 1,000 comments like, thanks, Matt Nagy. There is play design and there's play sequencing. Design is simply just, like, what are you scheming up? Are you getting good separation for your receivers by having good spacing, using picks and different things to, just create a good play? Sequencing is, are you going run pass too often? Are you running on 2nd and 10? Are you, disturbing the flow by something's working, you go away from it, yada, yada, yada. Getsy's sequencing has never been a strength at any point. I actually think the design gets more knocks than it probably should. I'm not saying he's good, but, for example, the screen stuff gets out of control. I get that. Against a team like Minnesota that blitzes 60% of the time, the screen game has kind of had to be that way. But
especially if you're not throwing slants.
Yeah. But the sequencing, and tonight in particular, was just abysmal. And the second and long runs have always been an issue all year long. And yeah, it was just bad.
Yeah, they didn't stay out of, and look, this was a big part of the reason why the game went the way it went was third down. The Bears did not execute on third downs. They had an absolutely terrible conversion rate. Let me grab it here really quick. The Chicago Bears on third down today were 3 for 11, while the Packers conversely were 7 for 10. When you have that kind of, difference there, one team's going to be keeping the ball and keeping, the chains moving, and one team isn't. And, there weren't a lot of third and manageables. The Bears didn't seem, I don't have that in front of me. They didn't seem to have a lot of 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3s. It seems like it was a lot of 3rd and 6 to 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, which you never want to be in. And I think that's some execution and some Getsy play calling. Absolutely. But they did not get the job done on third down. They didn't, the Packers, they weren't punting because they were converting third downs, and the Bears weren't getting the job done. And in the end, I always go back to something that Troy Aikman said in an interview that I was producing years ago. And this was when he was just after he had retired. So we're talking like 15, 20 years ago. And he had said, he goes, my job is to convert third downs. When he's talking about, he's got Emmitt Smith, the big offensive line, Michael, his job was to convert third downs. Those quarterbacks need to make sure they're converting third downs. That's what you got to do. And the Bears offense, I don't, care if you want to pin it on Getsy, Fields, execution, their third down offense just didn't get the job done.
No, it didn't. It really didn't. And I mean, here's a stark thing too. I know the Packers game always has elevated importance, and I get that. With ownership, probably shouldn't be that way, but I understand why it is. This is not a good defense. I mean, this is a defense, but everyone, we'll get into Fields. You talk about, maybe moving the first or not using the first round pick on a quarterback, and Bryce Young's terrible. Bryce Young averaged 7.8 yards per pass against this Packers defense. And the Panthers had 394 total yards of offense. The Bears had 192 yards tonight, and they averaged 5.6 yards per pass. They couldn't run the ball at all. Like, they didn't do anything. And this defense is bad. This is a bad defense. Joe Barry is one of the worst coordinators in the entire National Football League, and they did nothing tonight.
Yeah, that was really it kept bubbling up in my head, was seeing that, just knowing, and I understand it's Lambeau and the other one game was in Carolina, but just thinking that the Bryce Young offense scored 30 points against this defense. And I mean, you see what the Panthers did. Every game is like 6 points, 9 points, 0 points, 30 points. And then back to, it was so bad. And I was sitting there, I was like, the Justin Fields in this offense, they have to score. Like, they just by default. And let's get to Fields and let's kind of talk about the big conversation here. 9 points against this defense just feels like a shutout against an average NFL defense. It's unacceptable. It's poor. I understand that there were some dropbacks where Fields had no shot, where it was just collapsing around him. But, and not that there were that many dropbacks overall, but overall here, this offense, the passing offense, Justin Fields, I understand he didn't throw a lot of incompletions, but it did not click. And when you're playing an offense or a defense like this, especially when you're talking about you are playing for your job, Justin Fields is potentially playing for his job. You've got to put up better numbers than that. I hate to just put it on stats, Brad, but you have to put up better numbers than what he did today.
Yeah, and he made a nice throw to DJ Moore on a third down. You mentioned the poor third down conversion. The crossing route to DJ Moore was a great ball. Led him 33 yards, probably their best offensive play of the night, if I had to guess. I would assume it was, but almost interception to Cole Kmet in the right side of the end zone. Probably, I'm not going to do screen grabs. It was broadcast angle, but I think it could have been a touchdown. Instead, it was a dropped interception. There's just a lot of the things that we're kind of used to seeing. It wasn't just Fields. It was not. There was some quick pressure. I do think, honestly, there was a lot of not quick pressure as well. But there were some plays that were over before they began. There's no denying that in any way, shape, or form. It's a good defensive line for Green Bay. They just, again, sometimes you have Preston Smith guarding Devontae Adams, so he can't pass rush. So, it's a good unit. But yeah, it just ended the day. Just they did not make enough plays, and it's not just Justin Fields. But was he good enough tonight? No, not even close.
And that's the thing. And look, I know the Fields fans, and you're sitting there in your one jersey right now. I know the Fields fans had a lot of hope. And look, there is plenty of reason for hope. There are so many things that Justin Fields does well with the football in his hands. I'm not going to sit here and say he's a bad quarterback. But the bottom line here is, when there were chances to execute and have the big plays, it didn't happen. And the one thing that never marries to me, Brad, is, to me, when I watch Justin Fields play, he feels like he should be really good in the fourth quarter. The way he plays, the way he can create out of, and not, create his own plays, create his own passes, get the ball down the field, all the thing out of structure. I couldn't come up with the word out of structure. The way Fields can play out of structure, with his legs, everything like that. It feels to me that Fields should be a really good fourth quarter quarterback. But time and time again, when he has opportunities, and I thought a lot of it was unfair when Dan Weeder and guys like that were really getting on him in 2022 about his fourth quarter performances. But he's had a lot of opportunities this year, and basically just being able to hang on a throw to DJ Moore against the Vikings, it's just not enough, Brad. That to me is one thing that I really thought we'd see come into focus this year in a positive for Justin Fields, and it just hasn't.
Yeah, that's a fascinating conversation, because you would think that is the case, because we've seen him, razzle dazzle, the miracle stuff. And also just when you are in a fourth quarter, in theory, you're playing some prevent. So your scrambles, you can just pick up 10 yards. You roll out. If nothing's there, you just take off and get it a lot of the time. I think there is an issue, though, of his throw rate on scrambles is one of the lowest in the NFL. So when a guy does scramble, we now track, what is their actual rate of throwing the football when they scramble. Guys like Joe Burrow is 70% of the time. They're scrambling to throw. They're not scrambling to run. And again, there's no, everything's different. I'm not saying one's good, one's bad. But I think at a certain point, maybe teams caught on to the fact, all right, keep in a spy. And if he's rolling out and scrambling, he's trying to take off. And look, it's still going to work half the time because he's the best athlete on the field on most Sundays that he plays. But I think at a certain point, teams realize he's not really looking for, and again, it could be scramble drill, poor execution by the receivers. I get that. It could be he was overcoached, kind of you talked about early in the year. And so he's maybe thinking too much and he's maybe afraid to kind of do some of those things and uncork it outside of structure. But I think that's the big thing for me at the end of the day is I had a conversation with, I forget who it was, but one of our many mutual Bears fan friends. You watch some quarterbacks play, they're hoopers. We were talking this conversation, a guy that's maybe not the most, he's not LeBron skill-wise, but he's just a hooper. He's got post moves. He's got a little razzle dazzle. He has behind the back passes. That's what Mahomes and those guys do. Again, I shouldn't compare to Mahomes. That's what, a good out of structure quarterback does. There's a stiffness and a rigidity to his game sometimes. And I think that's kind of where it pops up. He's good, he's talented, yes, but there's not a fluidity at times, and it kind of seems kind of choppy and truncated, and it's tough. It's tough.
It's tough, and I think one of the things is how much is he keeping his eyes down the field for pass catchers when he's scrambling. And there was a really good example of it in this game. I wish I remembered exactly when the play was, but Fields was scrambling to the left side of the field, and pocket breaks down. He scrambles to the left. He scrambles for about a second and a half, stops, and you could see him look back downfield, see if he could find someone. Then he doesn't. He tucks the ball again, runs for like another second and a half, stops, looks up again. Like you could see, like you said, that clunky, kind of, it's not fluid because he's running, looking for space, looks downfield really quick, doesn't see anyone, runs, looks for space, looks downfield. I know in 2022, he was basically just keeping his head down and going. And you got to credit him for growing a little bit and trying to look for the open receiver down there. But it's still something that is lacking in his game, is being able to feel the pressure, scramble while keeping your eyes down the field and finding that scramble drilled, DJ Moore wide open and hitting them kind of thing.
For sure. And I will say, I do think part of that, like there are so many routes or route combinations where no one's breaking anything off before like 10, 12 yards of depth. So like that could be the issue, is like no one's open and it's not even conducive to a scramble drill where let's say a guy was running a 7-yard out and then Fields is bailing. Let me run across the field. Like they're probably doing that, but they're 15 yards downfield. And Justin's like, well, there's probably a linebacker or safety that's not in my field of vision, and I can't just uncork this because I see a guy right now because odds are it's going to get picked off. Like there's never often that outlet on the scramble drill itself, and also just on the actual design play. There's just still way too many. There was one down in the red zone today, one of the sacks where I guess maybe high red zone, probably maybe even like 25, whatever it was. He took a sack, and at first I was like, I think he held on to the ball too long. We get a view from the end zone behind Fields. No receiver had turned around yet. Like, he's already on the ground, and not a single receiver had even turned around to look at the ball yet. And that happened throughout the entire season. Getsy has so many concepts. It's like you're running 4 verts in the high red zone. Like, what are you doing? And it was like a 2nd and 5, too. So anyway, yeah, it's obviously a cluster. It's obviously not just one person, not just one thing, but yeah, I mean, and then let's get this out of the way too. Has to be addressed. The lack of penalty calls is insane. And the Jonathan Owens one was as bad as any have been this year, or maybe top 5 this year. It's insane. And I had someone respond to my tweet. Teddy Bruschi did a whole segment on it today on, I don't know what network it was on, whatever he works for, highlighting how many times Fields does not get late hit calls or roughing the passer calls or whatever, and like why it's like a huge problem. Like it's bananas.
It really is. That was actually it was the last thing I had on the game, was to talk about that hit and continue. I mean, it was violent. It was awful to see Justin's head slam into the turf like that. I know, and I don't know if the network is trying to cover the NFL a little bit, saying, I think that was okay for a non-call. I'm sorry, that was blatant. Justin Fields, it's like made a purposeful attempt, it looks like, the last 2 months since he's been back from injury, really, trying to slide more and trying not to get hit. And he continually is getting hit like this. It's ridiculous. You can only compare it to Cam Newton. That is the only guy. And Lamar Jackson, there are running quarterbacks that get more calls than this. Cam Newton, for whatever reason, never did. And now Justin Fields. I mean, never. Did he get one call the entire year?
I honestly don't know if he did.
I don't think he did. I don't think he had one late hit. And it's absurd that that's the case, because there were at least 8 or 10 over the course of the year that felt blatant. And the fact that hit again happened again, and then a couple plays later, they take him out for concussion protocol. He's out for one play. I don't know how much you can check with that. That's like I made a joke, like, Justin, you have a concussion? No. All right, get back in there. Like, that's what it felt like to me. But the bottom line is, it's unsafe and it's unfair to Justin Fields. That he takes hits. The injuries are part of the game for him, but late hits and blatant non-calls, totally unfair.
And was the irony of this one particular. They then spotted the ball to where he started his slide, but then didn't call a penalty. So how can those two things coexist to where you're saying, oh, actually, like, if you're going to say it's not a late hit, not a penalty, then spot the ball at the end of his slide. Like, you can't do both of those things. Yeah, no, it is. I guess, yeah, Cam Newton's the other guy who was 6'4", 240. And like, I guess for whatever reason, because, obviously we have a whole other conversation about maybe other reasons, but it's just it also just discourages exciting football play. And it's like, do you not want these guys to take off? Like, do you want to limit what they can do and have, Anthony Richardson, like took some shots too when he had the concussion, hit week 2 for him or whatever it was. I don't think it was a late hit per se, but like, do you want to not have, Dak stop scrambling after, the ankle injury? Kyler really scrambles anymore. Burrow probably isn't going to do it much more going forward. Like T-Law probably can stop. Like we can go down the list. Like these guys, even guys we view as quote unquote pocket passers, like scrambling is a huge part of a lot of guys' games when and like they're going to feel not, motivated to do it. And again, it's funny to have this conversation because obviously quarterbacks do get a ton of calls, but they can't only be in the pocket. There are so many roughing the passer calls that were less than what Justin Fields has taken a dozen times this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you listening live, this is not your average Bears post-game show. If you've got comments, I know they're coming in a bunch already. If you got questions, make sure you drop them in there. We will get to them at the end of this podcast. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we talked about this game enough. Let's talk about the big picture here. Matt Eberflus, Luke Getsy, and of course, Justin Fields. We'll be right back right after this. All right, welcome back into Not Your Average Bears postgame show. Brad Spielberger with Bill Zimmerman. We are talking about the Bears' loss to the Green Bay Packers, 17-9, finishing 7-10 on the season. And Brad, let's talk about the big picture here because we would be fools not to after this game. And I had talked about that. I did not like the idea of hearing so much from the media about how so much is dependent on this Green Bay Packers game. A lot of people felt that, a big game here or a really bad game could make a huge swing in terms of the futures of these three guys. I hated that. I thought it was a bad process. I understand it's a big rivalry game. I get how nice it would have felt to knock the Green Bay Packers out of the playoffs. But to me, it's just one game of 17. When you're talking about the evaluation of the future of the franchise and what you want to do with your coach and what you want to do with your quarterback, this was one game of 17. So I don't know what Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles were thinking and how much stock they were putting into this. This was a lot of speculation from a lot of different media members. And, I put out that poll, that media poll about what do you think is going to happen? And I mean, there was a good, 12 to 20% thereabouts for each one of those three guys that felt it really depended on the Green Bay Packers game. Now, I will say this, if that was true, nothing that happened today was positive for any of those three guys. So I don't know if it was an accurate process or not, but this evaluation here, anything that was left, the last taste in any of Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles' mouth, George McCaskey for that matter as well, is going to be really bitter after that game.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, I really think it's more McCaskey than the other two. Obviously, everyone cares about rivalry games, and they do matter extra, but to swing like an entire decision for the future that could impact 5-10 years of the franchise because of one game against a 500 Packers team, it'd be asinine, to put it lightly. But again, I'm sure. Again, all right, pause. Not going to say something I regret. Yeah, I think it is. I think it does have a heightened, and I think the media members you spoke with that told you that, they're not saying because it's their opinion. They're saying because they've heard McCaskey say it at podium for years and years. So, But yes, if it does, here's the thing. I don't think George really understands football much at all. So I talked about how, 7.2 yards per play equates to probably 35 points in an average football game. He's looking there saying we lost by one score. It was a close one. It was tight. No, you got absolutely demolished. Like in all three phases, you got destroyed. But I have no faith that he understands that. He sees, we held him under 20 and it was a one-score game and lost by 8 because he doesn't know what he's looking at.
Right. And that's the thing. And I don't like playing ifs and buts and candies and nuts because it was 17-9. That's the final score. The Bears had the ball bouncing their way pretty much the whole game. Like they had a couple calls that went their way. Like it was pretty overall. It was pretty darn positive in terms of quote unquote luck. And that's why I said, like, I don't want to sit here and say that things could have been better for the Packers. But that the thing is, and the truth is, they lost 17-9, but they missed a field goal that would have made it 20-9. They had an opportunity. They dropped a touchdown pass. That's another 4 points. That makes it 24. And then Matt LaFleur had a brain cramp. I don't know why they threw that out at the end of the half. That cost them another 3. Suddenly the score is 27-9 if the Packers executed just a scotch better. And I bring that up because those 10 points, the Bears did nothing to prevent those 10 points. That it's not like you said, oh, well, they got a fingertip on it, and if they didn't do that, no, that none of that mattered. And the fact is, it could have been worse. So I hope when they make this evaluation of Matt Eberflus, specifically Matt Eberflus, that they look at this and understand. And I believe, Ryan Poles, absolutely, I think he's a smart football guy. I think he absolutely does. But I do hope that his bosses, Kevin Warren and George McCaskey, understand that just because it was an 8-point game, it does not mean that you were competitive with the Green Bay Packers today.
I have full faith and confidence that everyone with a title working in the building understands it 110%. I'm wading in the waters of saying something bad. I mean, ownership. What evidence is there to suggest they know what they're looking at? It doesn't exist. So, I think they get that, and not to, again, like you said, the score is the score. But that's the thing too, though, is like the DJ Moore play. Like, I didn't really think it was a catch, to be honest. Like there are a couple like kind of bounces that actually went in their favor, and they still had 0 offensive touchdowns, a positive doink too, which is great. Hey, positive doink. That was the best, maybe the best moment of the game. So like it. Anyway, I'm just rambling now. It was not a particularly close contest. And yeah, at the end of the day, like I guess there wasn't any particular kind of coaching like outright blunder, but we've talked about like. I think Eberflus has developed a lot of good defensive talent. I do. I think the locker room adores him. I've heard that firsthand. There are in-game decisions that happen this season. This is a playoff team with a computer, with a nerd that everyone hates like myself, just making the 4th down decisions and the kick, field goal, whatever. That's a playoff team. Like, it's a fact.
Right. So let's talk about Matt Eberflus here for a minute, because I was just on DraftKings VSiN and they were asking me about Matt Eberflus, and I said this is a tricky evaluation. So now we know they lost to the Packers. He is 0-4 against the Packers. Justin Fields 0-6 against the Packers. If George McCaskey wants to put that into the evaluation, there it is for him. But this is a guy that has blown 3 double-digit fourth-quarter leads this year. He did not, I'm not saying this was all his fault, but he did not handle the Chase Claypool situation well. That became toxic in the locker room the first few weeks of the season. And although it's an odd thing to bring up, but it's still part of his staff, he had 2 coaches that lost their jobs, not because of poor coaching, but because of HR violations. Like there's a lot of odd things here that kind of happen this season, some on the field, some off the field. You talked about the decisions. There have been plenty of decisions that Eberflus has made throughout the year that you sit there and just scratch your head and really don't understand it. And I think you and I are very different into how we view points, especially in the second half. I think you're more aggressive on 4th downs and I'm more of a take the points guy. But I think even our, juxtapositions on that, I think we still came together a lot of times. It was like, wait, why is he making that decision? Like it didn't make a lot of sense to me. So, and you brought up a lot of the positives there. The defense developed, the young players developed, there's plenty of positives. And, I didn't understand it for a lot of the season. Why does this team love Matt Eberflus so much when he stands up there at the podium and blames execution and doesn't take a lot of blame himself? And he just doesn't feel like a leader of men, but something was going right in that locker room with Matt Eberflus behind the scenes. They all, I talked to, I didn't talk to players directly. I didn't hear it firsthand like you did, but I know for a fact, like Adam John said it on my podcast. He goes, I talked to a bunch of players off the record. What do you when it was not going well, when they were like 1-5 or whatever it was, he goes, no, we like him. He keeps us accountable. He supports us. I was like, all right. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say they're lying when it's off the record and they're talking to beat reporters they trust. So when I sit here and try and evaluate Matt Eberflus and don't try and overreact to this Packers game, I know in my media poll that I think about 80% thought he was back regardless. And I know a lot of big-time media guys, Ian Rappaport, and a lot of these guys were trying to report on this morning. No one was saying Eberflus is safe. They were all saying he was leading safe. But you got Jim Harbaugh knocking on the door here. He clearly wants to get back in the NFL. There is, when you look at this evaluation, and you can't just separate Eberflus and Getsy and Fields, it is kind of a collective group. When you have an opportunity to bring in an offensive coach and line it up with a rookie quarterback, if the evaluation is that we are going to draft a quarterback at number 1, there's not enough there for me to say that Matt Eberflus should remain coach, even though it would be wild, and I think it would upset players if they made a drastic change like this.
And here's the thing, and people don't expect this, from people in my position. Locker room matters. culture matters. All the buzzwords, of course, it can go too far, and all of a sudden we're sitting there and being like, okay, it's great that there's like kumbaya, but they're not good. Like, obviously, there's a certain point, but I do put stock in those things. And I, like I said, yeah, they love them. They always have. Well, I've heard that consistently from various different people inside the building in various different positions. But I met the guy. He's the most Midwest dad of all time, and I mean that in like the most positive way. He's every dad I grew up with, and I mean that in a nice way. Like he's a great guy, but I think there is still a lot of positive there because like the defense, frankly, I thought, of course, second half of the season, like there still were holes and warts from a personnel standpoint, and they played above it. It comes down to, like you said, now it's the interrelatedness where if this ownership group is going to actually learn from process before and look at what happened the last time he took a quarterback, the last two times he took a quarterback in the first round. And I know it's tough because it's like Eberflus is maybe good, but he's building something. I get all that. But say, okay, the downside risk is we draft a quarterback with a coach that is not on the greatest of standing, and then maybe he gets fired after a year, and the new quarterback has to then work with a brand new regime that didn't. I guess it'd be different if you keep Poles because Poles would be the guy who drafted him. But again, if next year is a disaster, maybe it's both. I think there is an outcome where maybe Eberflus gets fired, but Poles stays this offseason. So maybe that risk is maybe less there. But it's the thing. Like it happened with Fields, and it set him back. It happened with Trubisky, probably set him back to a degree. Like if you do it again, that's where I come back to. Like, and I'm just picking out George McCaskey. But like, why would I have any faith he knows what he's doing? So anyway, long answer short. You and I spoke. What I told you was, and it's based mostly on my opinion, but I have conversations. Like I think Flus is pretty much safe unless they lose by like 30 to Green Bay in an embarrassing fashion. They lost by 8. It's not 30. It was an embarrassing fashion, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's really going to be fascinating how this evaluation process plays out because, like we've talked about so much with Matt Eberflus and lining things up and everything. And I wanted to bring up one point. You said the last 2 times. Technically, the last 3 times they drafted a quarterback in the first round, this happened. Because if you wind back to 2003, Rex Grossman, that was Dick Duran. Duran gets fired. Lovie Smith comes in 2004 with a brand new offense for Rex Grossman. I understand that's 20 years ago, but literally it's the last 3 times. The last time they lined it up was Dick Duran and Cade McNown, and that went really well. So, but the fact is that you're right. It opens the door to do this. If you're going to draft Caleb Williams or Drake May and keep Matt Eberflus, it opens the door that you are going to blow it up after this season if it's a disappointing year and not line this up again and force a quarterback to learn 2 offenses in 2 years. It's to me, there's not enough positive for Matt Eberflus to roll this dice and do this moving forward. That's been my whole point the last couple months is, I was sitting there on the fence and Eberflus kept winning. But when you have this opportunity here, it's really tough for me to pass up, whether that be Jim Harbaugh, whether that be Ben Johnson or Bobby Slowick or any of these offensive minds potentially. I'm not saying it has to be the big dog in Harbaugh, but I do think it's interesting that 2 different sources, one mentioned the Bears by name, and that's Tony Pauline, who does get pretty good information. And another one, and I understand it could be Washington, there's other teams, but I think it was Ian Rappaport who said, potential suitors for Harbaugh were the Chargers and maybe the Panthers. I don't remember what he said. And another team that's job is not currently open, which to me screams Chicago Bears to me. I understand, like I said, it could be Washington, but the Jim Harbaugh thing is interesting. And I do wonder, I had someone, I'm not going to say who, but I had someone who did not participate in my survey because he said he knew too much. And I really wonder if he had some idea that the Chicago Bears were going to put their toe in the Jim Harbaugh waters.
Because and the key there, and I'll tie this into a couple things you talked about. The key there is because that would happen faster. I mean, that game plays tomorrow night, and then a team can interview Jim Harbaugh on Tuesday. And knowing Jim Harbaugh, he'll be ready. He'll be ready Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. for an interview if someone wants to have a Zoom with him. So, and the thing there is what I come back to is let's say you do keep Eberflus, and we can have a fuller, larger conversation about Getsy if you want. I think we just agree he's not the guy. How are you going to convince coordinators to come coach for you? I mean, look, it is an attractive job to say, hey, come coach Caleb Williams or Drake May with DJ Moore and Darnell Wright and the 9th overall pick, which could be Rome Odunze, whatever. Like that element is attractive for sure. So maybe it's not this doomsday scenario, but it's just you're not going to get the cream of the crop. Realistically, it's likely you're not going to get the best offensive coordinator in the world. Maybe you do, though. Maybe you go after a guy that is currently an offensive coordinator at a team that has an offensive head coach, like a Mike McDaniel. So you look at his, or Kyle Shanahan, whatever. You look at their OCs. There are candidates, but that's the last piece, too, is Harbaugh, for all his warts. And I think you and I have had a lot of conversation about Harbaugh. I think there's a lot to love. There's a lot that gives you pause. His history in college and pros, I mean, and not even they go on to be great head coaches per se, but he led the Vic Fangio revolution at Stanford. That was underneath the umbrella of Jim Harbaugh. He had Greg Roman. He had the Colin Kaepernick offense that he fell in love with at Stanford, watching Nevada play and being like, what they're doing is going to change football. So on both sides of the ball, he quietly has been like a revolutionary of the last 20 years. So I do believe in that standpoint. Like, I know in the polling article he mentioned, I'm not interested in Greg Roman. I'm not interested, in Pep Hamilton, with all due respect at all for either of those guys. But he does have the gravitas and the pull to bring in and surround himself with a ton of smart people, build this kind of nucleus and kind of he's a floor raiser. Say what you will, but maybe you can't reach the ceiling because he's old school and wants to whatever. The floor would be super, super high. Jimmy Harbaugh takes over this team. In 2025, they're a playoff team. I would be shocked if that's not the case. I just then wonder, are they winning a Super Bowl? Is a different question.
Yeah, no, that's a tough question. Jim Harbaugh is definitely not number one on my list. But I would say this: if you're going to tell me you have two choices, Matt Eberflus or Jim Harbaugh, it's not even a hesitation for me. I would absolutely go with Harbaugh. So let's see. We'll circle back and I'll get your who's in, who's out right at the end here before we wrap up. Let's have a brief conversation about Luke Getsy before we get into Justin Fields' future. To me, the question with Luke Getsy, I mean, obviously, if Eberflus is gone, Getsy's gone. There's not even any conversation there. No one's coming in here and saying I want to retain Luke Getsy. That's not a question. But the question is for Matt Eberflus. And again, you sit there and listen to broadcasts and go, where did this come from? I mean, Tony Romo spent 2.5 hours talking about how wonderful of an offensive coordinator Luke Getsy is. I don't know where he got that from, but he was definitely fed that information from somewhere because the Bears weren't moving the ball and he kept praising Luke Getsy. So he had something. It felt a lot like Chris Collinsworth and Tyson Bagent a lot of times here, in that Sunday night Chargers game. But the bottom line is, if Justin Fields is back, we'll talk about Fields here in a second. If Justin Fields is back, is it better to have Luke Getsy and give him continuity? Or is it better to say, all right, Justin, we are going to bring in a new offensive coordinator. We're going to make a new offense that we think is going to fit your skills better, and we're going to move forward that way?
Have to change it. So the big thing for me there is we've now seen 2 years in a row, Luke Getsy doesn't want to run an offense that is catered to Fields' skill set. So the first year in 2022, when the Patriots game happens, they changed the offense. And also, Getsy has adapted other elements. I think he realized with who he had at running back and who he had at the offensive line, people think he runs the Packers run game. He doesn't. He runs an inside zone gap scheme run game. It has nothing to do with the Shanahan outside zone. It's not his foundation. His foundation is Joe Moorhead, RPO. Anyway, it's a whole other conversation. But from a pass game and building around your quarterback standpoint, he didn't want to do it going into 2022 and then pivoted, and it obviously led to a lot of positives. He chose to then go into this offseason and say, all right, I'm going to pivot back to doing, I guess, what he's more comfortable with. I don't know what it is. No boot rollout, no play action, again, not no, but way lower than it should have been. A bunch of full field reads and making him sit back behind an offensive line that wasn't healthy. No Tevin Jenkins at that point. A Darnell Wright that's a rookie playing in his first couple games of his career. And then again, had to kind of pivot again and all right, let's start running the ball 12 times a game, design run with Fields, and you saw some results, but he doesn't want to do it. So I don't see how you can sit there and say, we're going to bring both back when they don't I'm sure they like each other at the hug at the whatever, after Justin kind of said he was a little bit fed up. But no, you can't. If you're going to bring Fields back and say, we're going to design this entire thing around him, fine. It cannot be with Luke Getsy.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I said. I wanted to have a brief conversation because I figured we were going to agree there. I don't see any reason to have Luke Getsy back. It doesn't work for either reason. Whether you're going to run it back with Justin Fields, I would say let's build an offense that fits Justin Fields' skill set better. Or if you're going to move on, there's nothing I saw in this season from Luke Getsy where I would feel comfortable if he had Caleb Williams that, could Drake May run his offense perfectly and everything would mesh? Sure, there's possibilities there. Absolutely. But I don't feel comfortable with Luke Getsy having a fresh quarterback or evolving with Justin Fields. So I think either way, that's pretty straightforward. But I'm just going to say this. I think after this game, Justin Fields, I have a hard time seeing this team bring him back. And I see a lot of media and a lot of people saying, oh, well, you don't have to pick up the 5th-year option. You can decline it and then, trade down and get the haul and then just determine what you're going to do with Fields in one more year. To me, no, it's over. The evaluation is over. If you're Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren and the whole team up there and you're saying, I feel good in Justin Fields, he's going to keep getting better. I feel good that he's our quarterback of the future. I love the Falcons game. He's more in command. I understand the Packers game wasn't what we wanted, but I have belief in him, and I'm okay paying him $45 to $50 million a year. If that's the evaluation, then that's the evaluation and go for it with Justin Fields. But Brad, this, dipping your toe in the water, when you have the number 1 pick, when you've got the resources, they're not sitting there with the 12th pick and you got to determine if JJ McCarthy's your guy or not. It's a totally different argument. You're sitting there with the number 1 pick. I just don't see a way that Justin Fields is back here in 2024. I really don't.
Yeah. So the first point, look, I know that we want to just be fans of the sport and enjoy a game that we all love. It's a business. And to synthesize this against the team we just played, the Packers, Andrew Brandt's famous quote, the worst time to be drafting a quarterback is when you need one. The reason why, at a very high level, the reason why this team has beaten us, 8 years in a row, is because their quarterback just sat for 3 years, then stepped in, and ours had to get a new coach and had the worst supporting cast of all time in the first couple of years of his career. Like, at a very high level, it really is that simple. So, no, it is not, I'm not going to say it's like, not to be a know-it-all. It's not an option. There is not a legitimate option where you say, all right, we're going to decline the 5th-year option and not draft a quarterback and see what happens. No, you either pick it up and that's your decision, or you don't and you trade him and you take the first overall quarterback. There is not a middle ground there if you're trying to be a seriously run team. I'm not saying, I know you get this, but, and again, I know that sucks. That's how the sport works, and it's unfortunate, but that is the reality of the situation. I struggle to see it. I will say this. My coming around the second half of the year was if they had 1.03, 3rd overall pick. So you know what? I think there's 2 quarterbacks. And look, I think there's a drop-off. JJ McCarthy, Jaden Daniels, I don't care. Like, there are 2 guys that probably should go top 3, probably go top 2. And then I think the rest of those guys, I think Daniels will go top 15. This is a whole conversation with my draft opinion. I think Penix goes first round, but even that I think is questionable. And I think nobody else goes in the first round. I got to a point where I said, okay, if we didn't have this at our disposal, you take Marvin Harrison Jr., you do yada yada, you figure this thing out. With 1.01, there is not a decision. I'm sorry to say it's not a conversation. It's not a debate. It's going to be a debate for the next 3 months on TV, whatever. There is no conversation. It's done. It's over. It's finished. I'm wearing the jersey. It's over.
Yeah, and that's look, we're on the same page with that. And the one thing that I think fans and media aren't weighing enough in this conversation is the financial aspect. Like, you keep hearing it's Justin Fields with Marvin Harrison and 1st-round picks, or it's Caleb Williams and you don't get the haul and all that. The big difference is, and forget, can you re-sign Montez Sweat or Tevin Jenkins and Jalen Johnson? Forget all the players. Just the nuts and bolts of the financial decision. And, I may not have this perfectly, but Caleb Williams is going to be making about $8-9 million a year moving forward, or Drake May for 4 years. And Justin Fields, like, let's just say you pick up the 5th-year option, and then you're only talking about 1 year of affordable Justin Fields, 1 year where it's not bad. And then it's going to balloon, because the Daniel Jones contract is huge in this, because David Mulugeta, if I'm pronouncing that right, he is not taking less than Daniel Jones. Like, it's not happening. There's no way Justin Fields is going to be on a $30 or $35 million a year contract. The floor is $40 million, and I think it's comfortable, and no one's going to sit here and question if Daniel Jones and Justin Fields are close. Everyone is going to say that Justin Fields is a better quarterback than Daniel Jones. I don't think there's any debate. Now, you don't have to top Justin Herbert. You don't have to top Joe Burrow. but that means you got to push $50 million. That 45 to 50 million, that's the range to pay Justin Fields. And the fans want to sit there and be like, oh, well, it's a couple of years down the road. You don't need to worry about it right now. That's nonsense to me. The financial aspect of this, to me, Brad, is probably the biggest of this whole conversation, and nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, no, and I get it sucks. Like I do. There's some elements I joke. I hate my job. I'm like the wet blanket of football coverage. But like, you're saying you push off the decisions tomorrow. Like literally, like the decision is literally at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning is when they're kind of start working through this whole thing. Yeah, no, it is the biggest piece, and I know it's oversimplified, but yes, you could hit on every single other first round pick and build the 49ers, and then say, okay, if Justin Fields on the 49ers, could that team make an NFC Championship games? Like, yeah, probably, but realistically, the faster or the more likely path is you hit on a quarterback at 1.01, whoever that is. That'll be a whole different conversation. And that guy elevates the players around him. Maybe he doesn't make the playoffs his first year. That's entirely possible. But over the course of that rookie contract, about $40 million over 4 years, you are saving an astronomical sum if he's an above average quarterback on that stretch. I'm saying above average, like Jared Goff makes a Super Bowl. Carson Wentz gets a 1 seed. Like, go through all the even guys that you don't think were elite. But still, because they were above average, top 14 quarterbacks on a rookie contract, that's Jalen Hurts last year, like yada, 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 yada. That's that. You just have to do it. Walking into a Daniel Jones situation, like, go look at the Giants, folks. Like, go check it out.
Yep. And you brought up the 49ers, and that's one thing. And I brought this up on my podcast before, and it's been bombarded to me on Twitter. You got to build the 49ers, and Justin Fields. And my response to that, Brad, is in that conversation, Justin Fields is Jimmy Garoppolo. That's how that works when you build the 49ers. The 49ers are able to go out and get Christian McCaffrey and keep all these guys right now because Brock Purdy's making less than $1 million a year. And that is huge. And again, if he was if it was a Caleb Williams, Drake May guy making $8-9 million, or Justin Fields on a rookie contract for another 3-4 years making $8-9 million, it's a totally different conversation to me. But when you have to pay Justin Fields that big chunk of money in a couple of years, you're going to have to sit there and go, who can we keep? Tremaine Edmonds, we got to have to cut him. And because we're not going to be able to keep him around. We're not going to be able to re-sign maybe Kyler Gordon at that point when he's up. Like, those are the type of decisions you have to make. And that's the Philadelphia Eagles aspect, because it used to be the 49ers and the Eagles until the Eagles started falling apart at the end of the year. And now I think we're going to see something different with the Eagles because they paid Jalen Hurts. And I'm not saying that was the wrong decision at the time, but they made that decision to pay him. They will not have as much salary cap space moving forward. They are going to start bleeding talent over the next few years. It's the nature of the business. The 49ers, when they have to pay Brock Purdy, that, if they're going to do that, who knows what the 49ers are going to do, but I assume that's the direction they're going to go at this point when they're winning with him. Like, then it becomes a different conversation. And to me, it's not just the rookie contract that's big. It's does your quarterback outperform their contract? Patrick Mahomes makes obscene amounts of money, and he's still, in his worst season ever, is still outperforming that contract. Daniel Jones, before he got hurt, was not outperforming his contract. The Giants were in the toilet. Kyler Murray, I know he was hurt, not outperforming the contract. The Cardinals are in the toilet. Like, it's pretty simple. If Justin Fields is this guy, if we're near his ceiling where he is capable of big games, but for the most part, it's a few big plays, but inconsistent in the body of a game. If this is the quarterback making $47-48 million a year, the Bears aren't going to win.
Not at all. No, they are most certainly not. And then, like you said, it just gets tough to retain talent. Gordon, Jenkins, go down the list. Like, again, you can keep some of those guys. Obviously, they still have a very, very healthy cap situation. They still have a ton of draft picks. In this hypothetical, they'd be in, a ton of new draft capital would come in. But it's just, even the Niners themselves with Jimmy Garoppolo lost Super Bowl and almost won it, and then traded to the farm to go get Trey Lance because they knew they had to just kind of start over and reset at the quarterback spot and get cheap there to be able to retain all these players. Like, are they going to pay a Brandon Ayuk? Like, they're still facing these tough decisions. Trent Williams is 35 years old. He's the only above replacement level player on the entire offensive line this year, and who knows how much longer he plays. Like, they traded DeForest Buckner away for a first round pick and got Young there. Like, the good teams that sustain being good, they make these tough decisions because you have to. It's just the nature of the business. Is Eric Armstead going to be a 49er next year? I would bet no. Like you go down the list, and these are very, very good football players. That's just kind of how it goes. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll let it play out. Like you said, this game didn't really help anyone's bucket. But I just want to, like, I don't know, ending point for me. Like, it's not an anti-Fields thing. We agree. If they had the third overall pick, this podcast would be about how can the Bears get a new coaching staff to elevate Marvin Harrison Jr. and Justin Fields. Like that would be what the title of the podcast would be. But the situation they're in, you just cannot pass on the first overall pick in this class.
All right, Brad, let's wrap it up with a few questions here. Let's get to Radori 17, who says the defense allowed only 17 points. Offense had 9 points on field goals. How is this loss in any way on the defense? And here will be my response to that. The Packers did not punt the entire game. The Packers had 430, I think it was, total yards of offense. And as we said, earlier in this podcast, the Packers left points on the field where the Bears were fortunate. 432 points. You brought it up, Brad, 7.2 yards per play. They had no pass rush. They gave Jordan Love all sorts of time. The 17 points was kind of fluky. The Bears lost this game a lot worse than they did. And yeah, the offense wasn't good, but the defense, Brad, just did not perform. Yeah, no, like bend up breaks. It's great. They didn't play well at all. They got destroyed. I know it's hard not to look. Scoreboard is a scoreboard. The result's the result. I get that. I'm saying the loss is on them, and the offense scored 9 points. So the loss is on the offense, but the defense could have lost this game 30-28 in an alternate universe. Again, based on the production that happened, and then we'd be saying the offense scored 28 points, but the defense let them down. That's that's where we're coming from. Yeah. All right. Now we'll get to. I'm kind of scanning through all the questions here, and everyone's kind of basically saying the same thing. So I'm going to do one here from Sam Winkler, Brad, since it's on the draft here. How good would an offer have to be for the first pick to not draft a quarterback? Now, so let's think about it, Brad. And you tell me you know the draft well. How obscene does the pick have to be? And maybe it's Washington who just wants to come up one and get their hometown kid, who's now, I believe Washington's drafting too. But what kind of offer and where would the Bears be comfortable falling back to? Is it falling all the way back to the Raiders at 11, 12, wherever they're going to end up finishing, and you get Max Crosby, 3 first-round picks, second-round picks? Like, is that you sit there and say, all right, let's run it back with Fields? Like, where is it with you where you can sit there and say, all right, let's keep Justin Fields and make this trade? Is there one possible? Because if whoever's at 9 had the exact same offer that the Panthers did with whatever your DJ Moore equivalent is, that wouldn't be enough for me. Agreed. So I'll say this specifically: the two teams you'll hear about, I think, are going to be the Giants at 5. If they want to basically bring a quarterback in, they'll keep Jones for one more year, but his deal essentially ends after next year from a guarantee standpoint. Make sure he passes the physical, sayonara, a new kid takes over. Or it's at 8, which is where Atlanta now ends up. Might have a new coach. Arthur Smith got embarrassed again today, and obviously, had a fight with Dennis Allen after the game, and all those good things. That's the interesting part, though, is that you look at the thing. Arizona seems very committed to Kyler Murray. I believe it. I don't think they would come out this strong with the messaging if they weren't going to stick by that. So, obviously 2, 3. Okay, so 2 and 3 are obviously in the mix. That's Washington and New England. But then 4, no. 5, I said Giants. 6, Chargers, no. 7, Tennessee, no. And then it's Bears 9. I mean Atlanta 8, yes. And then Bears 9, Jets 10. Jets maybe, but if Aaron Rodgers' team trades up for a quarterback and he's gonna put out so many new conspiracy theories, your head will explode. So so that's not happening. So realistically, you have 2 spots there, 5 and 8. I get that the quarterback class is viewed as generational. I love the prospects too. You're not going from 1 to 2 and getting like 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and Terry McLaurin. Like you're just not, because you don't really have leverage. If you're willing to move the pick, you're willing to move the pick. If there are multiple suitors and they say, okay, well, New England's calling us, New York's calling us, Atlanta's calling us, so you're competing with them. So therefore, you're going to pay a premium because it's not just about how much you're moving; it's that you're boxing out for your player. Yeah, you'll get a good offer, but it's just the Godfather offer to me only then comes from the Giants at 5 or the Atlanta Falcons at 8 is where you're then talking like, let's say for the Giants, 5, their own second, the Seattle second they got for Leonard Williams,
plus 2025 first, 2025 second, plus 2026 first, 2026 second, like plus a Dexter Lawrence. Like, I still think that's kind of insane, like throwing that out there. But like that's like, I guess in theory where you're saying, okay, 5-1, we're missing out on not only the top two quarterbacks, but also not going to get Marvin Harrison Jr. in that scenario either. That's what we're willing to do. I don't know if New York does that. So I don't know. Very long-winded answer. I just don't think the offer exists. I just, as crazy as this sounds, this isn't revisionist history. This isn't hindsight analysis. I'm not talking about last year, but I'll tell you right now, in my opinion, I would rather take CJ Stroud than the Giants first, their second, another second, their first. I would take CJ Stroud over 3 firsts, 3 seconds right now. Like, I'm not saying the Bears rookie is going to be CJ Stroud, but that's how valuable getting a franchise quarterback is.
Right, absolutely. So we'll wrap up with this question because this kind of fits into the final question here that needs to be answered is, what do you, that's from Football CF Candy, what do you think the Bears do now that, the season's in the rearview mirror? So Brad, let's just kind of go through this. And before we start with what they'll do, since we both said we feel Justin Fields is out, let me ask you this, especially, if we talk about the final taste was a little bitter, even if it wasn't all Justin Fields' fault today with a terrible offensive line in front of him. What can the Bears expect, do you think, if they decide to trade Justin Fields this offseason? Is a second-round pick legitimate? I know some Bears fans are hoping for a first, or is it like a third? There's a huge swing there between a late first and a third-round pick. I would think there should be enough suitors that they can get it to, but you're the expert. You tell me.
My understanding, both on the research and stuff I do, looking at prior player trades, all of that, and then also, again, a couple conversations, but trade stuff, I'm not going to say is like some solid intel. Second round pick. You're not getting a first round pick for Justin Fields. And then again, that's more of a contract thing than it is a player thing. But I do think you are getting a second round pick because, and this is important, Fields is one of the most universally liked players in any building across the entire National Football League. He has intangibly every single box you want to check for a franchise quarterback. Fields has it in spades. There is no doubt about that. There's not a single person inside of Hallis Hall that would tell you otherwise. And that does how you convince another building that's kind of floundering, doesn't have good options at their disposal. That's how you get them to pay up a little bit more and come give you a second round pick. So yeah, Darnold was a 4, a 6, and a 2. The 2 was a future 2. So you kind of, a devaluation, all that stuff, whatever. It's in that range. A 1 is just realistically not going to happen. I mean, hey, if it does, shout out Ryan Poles. But yeah, anyway, long answer short, I think it's a 2. I think you got to keep an eye on it.
Do you think it would be a 2+, like a 2 this year and a conditional?
Yes, 2+, but the plus I think would be day 3.
Okay, so like 2. Do you think it'd be like a conditional or like a 2 and a future 4, that kind of thing?
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So let's wrap it up then, Brad, with the big 3 here. So you are in agreement with me that Justin Fields played his last game for the Chicago Bears today.
Yeah.
All right. So we're in agreement there. And Luke Getsy coached his final game in the Chicago Bears today.
Yeah.
All right. So then let's get to the last one. Matt Eberflus, I know you were definitely leaning a certain direction. Will we hear from Ian Rappaport, Tom Pelissero, Adam Schefter, doesn't matter. Will we hear on Monday that Matt Eberflus is retained as the Chicago Bears head coach?
I'm going to go yes.
All right. I would have gone yes. And because maybe I just want it so bad and it's clouding my judgment, I'm going to go out on a limb right here on this podcast and say that Matt Eberflus will not return, that Ryan Poles is too good of a football guy. And when the assessment is that they're moving on from Justin Fields, that they are bringing in the offensive coach. So we agree on 2. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Matt Eberflus is and I've brought this up on my podcast before, Matt Eberflus is the Rick Renneria to Joe Madden in this situation. He did a good job, not good enough. The Bears go out and get their big coach to make a Super Bowl push here within the next couple of years.
Honestly, I think he was going to be regardless. He was a floor raiser, a culture builder, a program, and he did that, right? And he could get another year to do it further, or maybe in your scenario, he doesn't get another year to do that. But he still deserves, like, for what he inherited to where they are now, there is no question there has been progress and growth. So.
All right. Well, there it is. Not Your Average Bears postgame show, the final one of the 2023 season. I thank all of you for joining myself and all my co-hosts throughout the year, and thank all of you today for joining myself and Brad after a rough 17-9 loss to the Packers. The Bears, again, have not won since Mitch Trubisky and Khalil Mack were running around on the field in 2018. It is a rough stretch. Hopefully things start getting better. But after Jordan Love's performance, you're going to have to start sweating these Packers games moving forward. Brad, thanks so much. Any final thoughts as we say goodbye?
See you next year, fellas.
All right. Bear down, everybody. Hang in there. Big news week this week. We'll see what happens. Adios.